Hello everyone, I'm going to present some qualitative research on experiences of adults with classical EDS. And this is an overview of my talk today. So for some background, classical EDS is a rare heritable connective tissue disorder, mostly due to COL5A1 and COL5A2 gene variants. It's characterized by very fragile and stretchy skin, which is prone to injury and atrophic scarring, and also generalized joint hypermobility. And there's been very little qualitative research published on the impact of classical EDS. So I was interested in exploring the psychosocial aspects of lived experience in adults with this condition. So I recruited participants through EDS Support UK, a patient support group, and each participant took part in a semi-structured interview, either online by telephone or asynchronous email. And the interview data were transcribed, anonymized, and then analyzed using thematic analysis. 16 adults with a self-reported diagnosis of classical EDS were recruited, mostly females, all identified as white, and there was a broad range of ages with a mean age of 55 years. So interview responses may be more nuanced because participants had the opportunity to reflect back over a lifetime of experiences. And analysis of the data brought out these 6 main themes. So the first theme was this idea of restricted daily function. The majority of participants had some symptoms which regularly limited day-to-day functioning. The presentation and severity of symptoms varied from one individual to another and tended to be more of a problem as they got older. Symptoms included joint pain, fatigue, difficulties with walking, and dislocations and autonomic dysfunction. And many were able to adapt well, but a few experienced substantial pain, fatigue, and disability and were more or less housebound. Physical symptoms had a negative impact on emotional health and contributed to anxiety and depression. Now, classical EDS is sometimes described as a mild type of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and there's very little clinical data published on older individuals with classical EDS. And my participant group, as I said, had a mean age of 55 years, which was much older than other cohorts published studies. So it's possible that age-related degeneration of the connective tissue may be a factor in explaining some of these reported physical limitations. The daily variability of symptoms could be challenging. For some individuals, physical difficulties, together with a lack of understanding from others, contributed to social isolation and feelings of loneliness. A few participants had pain in the temporomandibular joint in the jaw, which made speaking more difficult, and they were really hindered in their ability to engage socially. And with some exceptions, most were able to follow a career of choice. And there was a feeling that employment offered a sense of purpose, and having a supportive workplace made them feel valued as an employee. However, working did take its toll, and some spoke about sleeping the entire weekend to recover from the working week. Often fatigue or deteriorating health led to reduced working hours or early retirement. The next theme was a life of caution, and this highlighted the fact that the risk of injury to fragile skin and loose joints was always present. Living as normal a life as possible was important while avoiding any unnecessary risk. And this need to be careful guided their choices and behaviours. Decision-making often involved risk-benefit exercise, balancing risk against their desire to participate in that particular activity. Fear of getting hurt sometimes stemmed from distressing childhood experiences of accidents and hospital visits. One participant all her life was so careful to avoid any activity or event where she might be in a crowd of people, and years later she regretted missing out on life's experiences. Another theme was the concept of perception of self, and how classical EDS impacted on how somebody felt about themselves as an individual. A common thread was this feeling of being different to others. Their skin was different, their joints were different, and they were much more susceptible to injury. And classical EDS, as I said, is a rare condition, and as such, there's very little awareness in the general public about it. So in some, experiences of stigma, bullying, being excluded or treated differently had a detrimental impact on confidence and self-worth, particularly during adolescence years. And one participant said that as a teenager, she hated herself because her body was full of scars. Body image concerns measured in the interviews included the appearance of bruising and scarring, loose or excess skin, premature aging of the skin, and problems with gait or surgical scars. Behavioural changes were widely adopted to avoid drawing attention to themselves, such as dressing to hide scars, avoiding going to the pool or the beach, putting on a front to appear capable and full of energy. And these scars tended to fade as they got older, and most participants said that they grew to accept themselves as they were. But for some, the visible appearance of classical EDS, together with negative experiences over the years from being different, had an enduring impact on their mental health. Classical EDS can have different psychosocial impacts at different life stages. Childhood was associated with trauma and injuries and frequent absences from school, being excluded, stigma, and also the role of parenting styles in adjusting to living with the condition. Adolescence was much more about the impact of disfigurement and body image on self-esteem and confidence, difficulties in keeping up with their peers, and the lack of psychological support at this time of their life. Adulthood, it was much more about life decisions and responsibilities, such as worries about being a burden to their partner, the risks of childbirth, and reproductive choices. There was also a deep sense of guilt and responsibility in those who had children who were affected by classical EDS. At this life stage, participants had a good understanding of their own bodies, and they were comfortable self-managing their own condition day to day. And it was also remarked that age is a great leveler, and in older ages, their peers were also troubled by aches and pains, so they didn't feel so different. Ongoing health issues felt more concerning, though, and they wanted regular monitoring for reassurance. And many felt uneasy about the lack of information on classical EDS in the elderly. Healthcare experiences was a very strong theme from the interviews. So lack of awareness and expertise amongst healthcare staff was identified as a problem. Participants talked about needing to educate healthcare professionals. And this was frustrating and tiresome if they needed to see several different practitioners. There were many terrible reports of bad practice, and participants worried about being harmed by a healthcare professional. Many said that receiving a diagnosis of classical EDS felt validating, but it could be a confusing and frightening time. And following diagnosis, they felt on their own and unsupported. Navigating the healthcare system was challenging and stressful, and participants often felt like they were being passed around. Healthcare interactions could be difficult as well. Many felt that they knew their bodies best, and that healthcare practitioners weren't listening to them. They felt dismissed and belittled, and this created a lot of anxiety and anger and tension. And some were reluctant to seek medical assistance due to distrust or skepticism. And finally, the last theme was support and coping. The participants that I interviewed were remarkably resourceful, tried to deal with any issues themselves, or turned to family or partners as their main source of support. They generally didn't reach out to support groups, mostly because they felt that classical EDS wasn't well represented. A range of different practical and emotional coping strategies were employed, and on the whole, I got a sense of pragmatism and acceptance. This is my life and I can deal with it. So here's a summary of the findings. This research has highlighted the considerable impact of classical EDS on the physical, emotional, and social world of adults, and greater recognition and understanding of classical EDS as a multi-systemic condition by healthcare professionals is essential to support individuals better. And also improved access to specialist clinicians could be game-changing. A more holistic approach to care with greater attention to patient Emotional well-being and social factors is also needed. And finally, this is an exploratory study, so there's many potential areas for further research. Many thanks for listening.